Barragan is the former king of Hueco Mundo, a prideful hollow who desired to rule over all hollows. He gained this position through leveraging his abilities and powers that are centered around the inevitable natural cause of death, old age. He follows a philosophical doctrine that is inspired by the fact that all beings who experience life are doomed to an inevitable fate, which is death through growing old and frail. Barragan is a very interesting character, and in this video I want to try and understand him, through his motives, how he embodies his aspect of death, and his relationships with the other Espada and Aizen. Baraggan first appears in chapter 244 and in episode 145 of the anime. At first glance he appears to just be an uninteresting old man. He has the typical white hair and wrinkled skin. He has a scar running down the right side of his face and one on the left side of his chin extending to his neck. Baraggan is broad and muscular despite his age, and dresses like royalty with his white leather coat which is lined with black fur. To add to his royal appearance, he also wears a pointed crown on his head, further adding to his sense of self-importance. He is arrogant and condescending, referring to those who oppose him as mere ants. His sense of pride causes him to impose his will and authority onto others. Like in chapter 318 when Aizen is trapped, he immediately takes up the leadership position, even going as far as to challenge Haribel and Stark if they had a problem with him taking the lead. Baraggan is the second ranked Espada. Even within Aizen's army, he isn't worthy of being number one. At first glance assumed that he was the strongest amongst the Espada and would be ranked number one, as he appears to be the most experienced Espada, and thus understandably he would have more power than the others. In actuality, he is second to the younger, lazier Stark, who couldn't care less for his rank within the Espada. I'm sure that this must infuriate the egotistical Baraggan to know Stark is considered better than him. Baraggan was dethroned by Aizen and was further humiliated by assigning him with a lower rank than his self-pride could bear to tolerate. To understand Baraggan, we need to go over his backstory so that we can understand his relationship with Aizen, who he follows and acts under throughout the story. The backstory of the second ranked Espada is told to us in chapter 371, which is titled Kingdom of Hollows. We learn here that prior to joining the Espada, he was the unchallenged king of the Hollows, the king of Hueco Mundo. He ruled over the realm from his palace, Las Noches. He was incredibly bored as he had an army of Hollows but nobody to defend himself against or to attack. In his boredom, he is approached by Aizen, Gin, and Tozen, who recognize him as the king of Hueco Mundo. He welcomes their intrusion into his palace, as he states that if they didn't arrive, he was about to split his army into two factions and make them fight against each other. In a dismissive manner, he welcomes them to his castle, Las Noches. Tozen remarks that it is strange to call where he resides a castle as it has no walls nor a roof, but Baraggan tells him that he does not require a roof as the sky of Hueco Mundo is the king's roof. Aizen asks him if he is satisfied with his current position and form. He elaborates by asking him if he has ever questioned the state of the world and ever desired to rise to new heights beyond that which he has attained. Aizen offers his aid to grant him greater power to lead a new world on the condition that the king of Hueco Mundo obeys him in return. Baraggan laughs at this proposal and even questions his use of the terms a new world and greater power. He insults Aizen by calling him an ant. He reiterates that he is the king of Hueco Mundo, hence the king of the world. His arrogance leads him to say that there is nothing greater than he is. The only new world that can be created according to Baraggan is the one that he creates. He orders his hollows to attack Aizen and company, but he swiftly tears them apart, much to the king's surprise. Aizen understands the world that Baraggan controls and rules over. He calls it ironic that the king of Hueco Mundo and consequently the Hollows appears as a large black figure wielding a large weapon. He states that he looks similar to the Shinigami, who are the destined enemies of the Hollow. Baraggan is dethroned by Aizen and made to serve under him. This causes Baraggan to develop resentment towards him. At the end of the flashback, he thinks to himself he will kill Aizen with his own hands. He will make him regret that he ever gave him power. He is absorbed by his ego. He states that he is a king and a god. Notably, he also says that he will never die, which is a point I will come back to later on in the video. His belief that he will live forever leads him to affirm to himself that he will hunt Aizen down for all eternity for the ridicule he has bestowed upon him. Baraggan embodies the most natural and pure aspect of death, which is senescence. The inevitable condition whereby the physical body deteriorates with age is described as aging. The power of cell division is reduced gradually over time. This limits growth and causes the body to weaken and become frail over time. This degenerative condition occurs in all organisms. The difference between aging and senescence Senescence is that there is no reference to death when describing aging. Senescence, however, is the stage of development where the symptoms which present themselves are those which are near to the death of an organism. His aspect of death is reflected in his ability called Respira, which he uses in his resurrection form. This ability causes him to release a black and purple mist which causes anything that it comes into contact with to rot. The rotting will spread across the body until the affected portion of the body is amputated. The ability is so effective that it decays the flesh, and all that remains is skeletal remains and clothing. In chapter 369, he states that all living things will eventually die, and that the things that they create will also die. He himself fell victim to his own aspect of death in the end, and was defeated by his own power. His appearance as a hollow is unique and convinces you that he is the king of the lowly realm of Hueco Mundo. Physically, he appears as a skeletal figure, which represents the true form of humans under the layers of skin, flesh, and muscle. It is symbolic of death. Outwardly, he appears dead, but inwardly he perceives himself to be an eternal god. In chapter 318, Baraggan proves himself to be analytical as he deduces that Karakura Town has been swapped by a replica that is being maintained by pillars located below them. He orders his hollows and Fraction to destroy the pillars, as it will save them going to the Soul Society if Karakura Town is returned back to the real world. Baraggan doesn't appear much in the series, but he is present during the battle in Fake Karakura Town, where he battles against Soifon and the Vizard Hachi. In chapter 355, Baraggan is unimpressed by Soifon and a lieutenant who are proving not to be a challenge for the Espada, as they are exhausted due to their prior encounters. Soifon has difficulty landing an attack on him, as he reveals that each Espada has an aspect of death, and his is Senescence, caused by aging, which is a product of time. He can manipulate the time span of objects by simply touching them. He demonstrates this by causing the bones in Soifon's arm to grow old. He then activates his resurrection by using the word decay, which is appropriate to his character. His released form is called Arrogante, which is Spanish for arrogant, and in Japanese it translates to Great Skull Emperor, a term that once again fits with his character. He approaches Soifon and unleashes his ability Respira, which makes her arm rot away to a bone. She is forced to cut her arm off before it spreads further across her body. Barragan muses to himself as it appears that even Shinigami are afraid of death. Soifon activates her Bankai and fires a projectile towards the Espada, but despite the huge explosion, Baraggan appears through the smoke unscathed. Hachi arrives to aid Soifon, but the Espada proclaims that they are helpless against his power. Hachi tries to lock away Baraggan and his power with a Kido barrier, but it appears that his ability can even rot away Kido, stating that it is foolish to assume that Kido cannot grow old. Hachi continues to generate barriers and recites an incantation which creates a giant barrier that separates the Espada from them. Baraggan is caged, which allows Hachi and Soifon to devise a plan to stop him. Soifon, using her Bankai, fires the attack once more towards Baraggan, but this time he is caged and unable to divert the blast away from himself like he did before. He survives the attack but is badly injured. He refers to his opponents as ants and swears that they will not get away with what they have done. Chapter 370 is titled Discussing Life from God's Perspective, as Baraggan demands that they repent to him for disobeying the Great One. He proclaims that they will turn to dust. Like a wrathful god, he intends to strike them down. He refers to himself as the god of Hueco Mundo, which is interesting as it is an example that fits with Aizen's speech to Shinji about how men become kings and kings become gods. The Espada's prideful boasting about how great he is consumes him. He refers to his power as the one absolute in this world, referring to everything else as small and insignificant in comparison to it. He states that to be under his supreme power is the proper order of the world. Nobody is considered to be an equal to him. Baraggan points at Hachi as Respira attacks him and covers his right arm, rotting it. He tells the Vizard his life is comparable to the life of an ant in his eyes. After he stops his self-absorbed gloating, Hachi appears to have transferred his deteriorating right arm into Baraggan's stomach with the use of a barrier. Hachi repeats Baraggan's words, confirming that his powers are the only absolute in this world. Based on this logic, then not even the god of Hueco Mundo can withstand such a power. Respira, his own power, begins to deteriorate him. It was a gamble, but it appears to have paid off as the number 2 Espada becomes enraged with the Vizard, calling him an ant and looking down upon him till the very end. Before he fades away, he throws his axe towards Aizen in a final futile attempt at taking his life. His weapon rots before it reaches Aizen, as the god of Hueco Mundo too deteriorates into nothing. Hachi comments that he found it strange, despite his power rotting whatever it touched. How is it possible that Baraggan was not affected by it, considering he was a skeleton and it wouldn't take much effort to reduce his form to dust? He deduced that he must have a coating on the surface of his body which repelled the effects of his own ability. If this proved to be true, then the most effective way to defeat him was to insert his own power into his body via Hachi's rotting arm. He remarks that despite having a power that represented the absolute truth of the world, Baraggan was was ironically a small creature who too feared death, and did what he could to drive away his old age. He was killed by Senescence through his own power. There are many ironies to the king of Hueco Mundo's existence. He was dethroned yet called himself a king. He called himself a god despite not being eternal. His power was to deteriorate life from objects and beings, yet he himself was withered and frail. He was the closest to death and most afraid of it, despite ridiculing others for being afraid of it. He constantly called others ants, yet he is referred to as a small creature by his opponent who bested the self-proclaimed Great Emperor. Volume 43 of Bleach features a poem which elaborates upon Barragan's character. Decay is my friend, night is my servant. I'll wait for you in a palace of elm while I let the crows peck at my body. From my interpretation of this, Decay is my friend is in reference to his power, Respira, which aids him in battle. The night that is my servant is in relation to Hueco Mundo, which is the realm of darkness, the literal night. It is his servant as he is the king of that realm, with its inhabitants serving him. I wait for you in a palace of elm is in reference to the palace Los Noches, which is surrounded by elm trees, which in Celtic mythology are associated with the underworld. We can further interpret elm through its symbolism, as it is a tree that represents war and hope. The wood from elm is linked in mythology with death and the transition to the underworld. The wood from elm trees is also traditionally used to make coffins due to its durability, and the last verse, I'll let the crows peck at my body, is in relation to a decaying corpse being feasted upon by scavengers. This poem seeks to tell us about Barragan's intrinsic relation to death. He ruled over a world of nothingness, surrounded by reminders of death in his palace, all the while having a vessel which appears to have been pecked away at by scavengers. He was the nearest to death, which makes him the perfect embodiment of senescence, as he presented with symptoms common in those who are nearing the end of their life. He reminded others of their inevitable deaths, yet never accepted his own mortality. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. Based on the recent poll I posted on the channel, I asked all of you what other series would you like me to cover. I've been working on a few ideas based on the results of the poll and feel excited to present them to you in the coming weeks. So remember to subscribe and turn on bell notifications to not miss my new content. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, then please consider supporting my channel on Patreon. I have multiple tiers with rewards including access to an exclusive Discord server, video scripts, as well as being the first to know about unreleased upcoming videos. Thank you for your time, and whatever you choose to contribute I will appreciate, and it will mean a lot to me.